Welcome to Humanity Battleship. What if the most dangerous moment in history wasn't when something appeared, but when something recognized it inside the sanctuary of Orcs Prime? Analyst Teren Vale witnessed something impossible. 8 humans reacting in perfect synchronization to a signal that doesn't exist. No warning, no detection, just recognition. And that's when the real question begins. What did they hear that no one else could?
The first sign that something was wrong was not the anomaly. It was the reaction. The signal arrived in absolute silence. No warning spike. No carrier wave. No distortion ripple across the sanctuary's sensor grid. One moment the outer field was empty, the next it wasn't, and yet nothing had technically changed. No object registered. No mass displaced. No energy signature rose above background. By every measurable standard, space remained exactly as it had been. Except it didn't. Analyst Teren Vale felt it before he understood it, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, like trying to remember something that had not yet happened. The display in front of him remained clean. Perfect. Untouched. And across the chamber, the humans stopped. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone untrained to notice. The shift was too small, too controlled. A pause measured in fractions of a second. A collective stillness that did not belong to confusion or surprise. It belonged to recognition. Then they continued. Ambassador Ilara Thorn resumed speaking without missing a syllable, her voice steady, her posture flawless, her expression composed in exactly the way expected of a species standing at the edge of acceptance into the coalition. Around her, the delegates listened, nodded, recorded, judged. The moment passed. The anomaly did not repeat. The system logged nothing. Protocol said there had been no event. Teren knew that was wrong. Because he had watched 8 human representatives, each from different branches, disciplines, and cultural backgrounds, react at the exact same instant to something no system had detected. There was no signal. There was no warning. And yet they had all heard it. The ceremony concluded to measured approval. Humanity was granted provisional corridor access, advisory standing, and conditional inclusion pending further review. It was a generous outcome, perhaps even optimistic by coalition standards. Applause followed. Formalities closed. The chamber transitioned into its softer phase, where real decisions were shaped beneath the appearance of celebration. Teren did not move with the others immediately. He was watching the humans. They did what was expected. They accepted congratulations. They spoke carefully. They smiled at appropriate intervals. But there was no release in them. No loosening of tension. No trace of relief. They had not been waiting for the outcome. They had been waiting for something else. He saw it again minutes later in the observatory. A second anomaly. This one smaller. A flicker in the deep field lensing array that registered as nothing more than a calibration hiccup. It passed in less than a second. No alarms triggered. No systems flagged it. And again, the humans noticed. Not with movement. Not with speech. Just a subtle shift in attention, like a group of people quietly tracking a sound no one else could hear. Teren felt something cold settle into place inside his mind. 2 anomalies. No detection. Perfect human synchronization. That was not coincidence. That was response. He turned back to the observation glass, staring out into the vast, silent dark beyond Orcs Prime's shields. The stars remained unchanged. The void gave nothing back. But now the silence felt different. Not empty. Occupied. And for the first time in his career, Teren realized the most dangerous possibility was not that something unknown had appeared. It was that humanity had expected it, and had come to this summit knowing it was already here. Teren did not report it. The decision formed quietly, without drama, settling into place with the same precision he had spent his career cultivating. Protocol demanded immediate escalation. 2 synchronized behavioral anomalies tied to undetected external fluctuations during a first contact summit was not a detail. It was a fracture line. He closed the report window anyway. Because reporting it would freeze the moment into procedure, bury it beneath layers of review, classification, and delay. And whatever the humans were reacting to, it was already moving faster than protocol. He needed to understand it first. The observatory had thinned by the time he re-entered. Conversations drifted in smaller clusters now, softer, more personal. The artificial night cycle had begun to dim the upper lattice, leaving the glass aperture open to a darker, deeper sky. The humans were still present. That alone was unusual. Most new entrants, after securing provisional status, dispersed quickly, either to celebrate or to consult internally. Humanity remained. Not clustered. Distributed. Ilara Thorne spoke near the central rail with Sarat and 2 economic delegates. Her tone was unchanged, measured, thoughtful, almost disarmingly reasonable. Across the chamber, Mercer had resumed his role as cultural bridge, laughing easily with a group of junior archivists. Another human stood alone near the far edge, watching the storm-veined world below with what looked like quiet admiration. Separate positions. Clear sightlines. No overlap. Teren felt the pattern before he mapped it. They weren't mingling. They were holding the room. He moved closer to Mercer again, careful not to approach directly this time. He circled through a Keeler delegation, paused at a service alcove, and let the conversation draw him in naturally. Mercer noticed him anyway. Of course he did. "You're still working," Mercer said without looking at him, as if continuing a thought they had already shared. "I'm still observing," Teren replied. "That sounds more honest." "It usually is." Mercer smiled faintly. "And what have you observed so far?" "That your delegation does not behave like a group that just secured its future." A slight pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. "And how should we behave?" Mercer asked. "Relieved. Distracted. Off balance. And we are none of those things." "No." Mercer finally turned toward him. There was no challenge in his expression, no defensive tension. Just clarity. "Then perhaps," he said lightly, "we prepared. For a diplomatic reception? For the unknown." The answer landed harder than it should have. Teren held his gaze. "You reacted twice to something that does not exist on our sensors." "Does not exist," Mercer repeated. "Or does not register?" "That distinction is irrelevant without evidence." "Everything is irrelevant without evidence," Mercer said. "Until it isn't." Teren leaned slightly closer. "What are you expecting?" This time, Mercer did not deflect. "For something to stop hiding," he said quietly. Before Teren could press further, a third fluctuation rippled across the observatory glass. This one lasted longer. Not enough to trigger alarms, but long enough to feel. The air itself seemed to hesitate, a subtle pressure shift that made the chamber's ambient tones fall out of sync for half a heartbeat. Several delegates paused mid-sentence. A few glanced at the glass. But only the humans reacted in full. Not outwardly. Internally. A tightening. A silent alignment. A tension snapping into place across the room like a net being drawn taut. Teren felt it. Not as a sensation. As a realization. They weren't reacting to the anomalies themselves. They were tracking progression. He turned sharply toward the glass, pulling up the external feed on his wrist display. Nothing. No object. No signature. No deviation from baseline. And yet, the lensing grid, buried beneath layers of automated filtering, showed something else. Not a shape. Not a mass. A distortion in absence. Like space itself was being displaced without movement. Teren's breath slowed. He expanded the range. Adjusted the resolution. And then he saw it. Not directly. In the negative. A region of space that did not reflect starlight correctly. Too consistent to be natural. Too stable to be noise. Too large to ignore. His mind resisted the scale first. Because the distortion wasn't localized. It stretched. Far beyond the sanctuary perimeter. Far beyond orbital range. It wasn't approaching. It was already positioned.
Everything changes here. The entity isn't just watching, it's learning. Stars vanish without energy. Reality itself is being edited. Elara reveals the truth. It reacts to observation. And the moment Teren understands it, the entity sees him back. The sanctuary falls into darkness, and something ancient, vast, and incomprehensible begins to communicate, not with language, but with structure. The collection panics, but humanity has been preparing for this exact moment because this isn't a invasion, it's a test, and how it's waiting for an answer.
Analyst. The voice came from behind him. Turned. Ilara Thorne stood there now, having crossed the chamber without him noticing. Her expression was calm, but not diplomatic. Focused. You see it now, she said. It wasn't a question. Tern felt something tighten in his chest. What is it? A presence, she replied. That is not a classification. It's the most accurate one we have. You knew it was here. A small pause. And simply, yes. The word carried no apology, no hesitation, just truth. Why wasn't this disclosed? Turin demanded. Because your systems cannot perceive it, Ilara said. And because until it moved, we weren't certain it would matter. It's outside our detection grid. No, she corrected gently. It's outside your interpretation of it. Turin stared at her. How long? We began detecting anomalies at the edge of our expansion route 6 years ago. And you didn't warn the coalition? We tried, Mercer said, stepping in beside her now. You categorized our data as sensor instability. Trin's mind moved quickly, reconstructing fragments, dismissed reports, archived anomalies, patterns buried under statistical noise. 6 years. This wasn't new. This was ignored. Why is it reacting now? He asked. Ilara's gaze shifted toward the glass. Because, she said quietly, we just stopped pretending it wasn't watching. The chamber lights dimmed another degree. Not by design. A system correction. Minor. Barely noticeable. Except Trin saw the flicker ripple through the lensing grid again. Stronger this time. Closer. And for a single impossible moment. The distortion changed. Not position. As if something vast had adjusted its orientation. It had noticed them noticing it. Trin's breath caught. Behind him, conversations faltered. Across the observatory, delegates began to feel it now, not as data, but as unease. And for the first time since the summit began, the silence wasn't diplomatic. It was anticipatory. Trin turned back to Ilara, voice low. What happens next? She didn't answer immediately. Because she was listening. Not to the room. Not to the systems. To something else entirely. Then she said, almost to herself, it decides if we're worth revealing itself to. And somewhere beyond the reach of every coalition sensor, something moved. Again, the fourth movement did not bother with subtlety. It arrived as absence. Not silence. Silence still had structure, still carried the faint hum of systems, the distant rhythm of life support, the low conversations threading through the observatory. This was something else. A subtraction so complete it felt like the room had been hollowed out for a fraction of a second and then allowed to return. Lights held. Gravity held. Time did not feel like it had broken. And yet every living mind in the chamber knew something had been taken away and given back. Trin didn't look at the glass this time. He looked at the humans. Because whatever had just happened, they had expected it to escalate. Ilara Thorne didn't move. Her posture remained composed, her hands lightly resting along the observatory rail. But the stillness around her was no longer diplomatic, it was operational. Mercer, several meters away, had stopped mid-conversation without apology. The other humans had done the same, each one settling into position with the same quiet precision Trin had noticed before. They weren't reacting anymore. They were transitioning. Explain it, Trin said, the words coming faster now. All of it. Ilara exhaled slowly, as if releasing a decision she had already made. We don't know what it is, she said. Not fully. But we know what it does. That is not enough. It will have to be. She turned slightly, enough that her voice carried just beyond him without becoming public. It removes things, she continued. Not violently. Not destructively. It doesn't tear, burn, or collapse. It just edits. The word felt wrong the moment she said it. Teren's mind rejected it, then circled back because nothing else fit. Edits what? Reality, Mercer answered quietly from behind him. Teren turned sharply. That is not a measurable claim. It is the only consistent one, Mercer said. Objects vanish without debris. Signals terminate without trace. Entire regions lose continuity as if they were never part of the system to begin with. That's impossible. So was detecting it, Ilara replied gently, until we learned how to look at what isn't there. Teren's thoughts accelerated, pulling fragments into alignment. The anomaly logs. The dismissed reports. The statistical gaps. Not noise, absence. Not errors, subtractions. How much has it removed? He asked. Ilara didn't answer. Mercer did. Enough that you never noticed the pattern, he said. The implication landed harder than any direct statement. Teren felt it like a shift in gravity. You're saying this has been happening inside coalition space. We're saying, Ilara corrected, that it doesn't respect boundaries we understand. Another ripple passed through the chamber. This one visible. The glass didn't distort, it clarified. For a fraction of a second, the stars beyond Orith Prime sharpened unnaturally, every point of light resolving with impossible precision, before one of them blinked out. No flare. No collapse. No fading. One moment it existed. The next it didn't. A collective breath caught across the observatory. Someone spoke, too loudly, too quickly, demanding system confirmation. Another voice overlapped. The calm surface of the reception fractured. Teren didn't move. His gaze was locked on the empty space where the star had been. That system had no instability markers, he said, almost to himself. No, Ilara agreed. So what triggered that? The pause. Then quietly, we did. Teren turned toward her sharply. Explain. Ilara's eyes didn't leave the void. For 6 years, we observed it without acknowledgement. We avoided direct study. We limited active scans. We minimized interaction. You hid from it. We respected it, Mercer corrected. That is not the same thing. It is when the alternative accelerates contact. The chamber was no longer pretending at calm. Delegates were moving now, toward consoles, toward each other, toward exits. Orders began to surface beneath controlled tones. The sanctuary systems responded, layers of defensive protocol activating in soft cascades of light along the ceiling. Too late. Teren felt that certainty settle before he understood why. You said it reacts, he pressed. To what? Ilara finally looked at him fully. To observation, she said. The answer reframed everything at once. Not movement. Not proximity. Tension. Teren's pulse spiked. That's not possible. Neither is a star vanishing without energy release, Mercer replied. But here we are. No, Teren said, forcing clarity into his voice. Observation is constant. Thousands of systems monitor deep space continuously. If that triggered it. They don't observe it, Ilara interrupted. Silence. Then understanding began to fracture open. They can't, she continued. Not without the right models. Not without recognizing the absence as data. Your systems filter it out as error. And ours don't, Mercer added. We learn to keep the error. Teren's mind reeled. So the moment someone understands what they're looking at, it becomes visible to it, Ilara finished. Another pause. Longer this time. Because the implication wasn't just external. It was immediate. Then everyone in this room, Teren began, is now part of the observation set, Mercer said. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop, though Teren knew that wasn't physically accurate. Around them, delegates were stabilizing into crisis behavior, controlled, procedural, disciplined. Orders were being issued to reduce sensor output, to mask emissions, to isolate the anomaly. To stop looking. Too late. You should have told us, Teren said, the words sharper now. You should have warned the coalition. Ilara didn't flinch. We tried, she said. You archived us. That was before. Before you believed it, Mercer finished. Teren opened his mouth to respond, and stopped. Because the distortion beyond the glass shifted again. Not subtly. Not gradually. Deliberately. The absence in space, vast, incomprehensible, folded inward at a scale the mind couldn't process. Not movement through space, but redefinition of it. Regions that had been distant were suddenly less distant. Boundaries compressed without transition. It wasn't approaching. Distance itself was changing. Do you see it now? Elara asked softly. Teren didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time, he did. Not as data. Not as theory. As presence. Something that had always been there, just beyond the edge of comprehension, now aligning with it. And the moment that alignment completed, the sanctuary lights failed. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Gone. Total darkness swallowed the chamber in an instant, cutting off every system, every display, every structured signal humanity or the coalition had ever relied on. Except one. Teren's wrist display remained active. Not because it still worked. Because something was using it. A pattern formed across the screen. Not language. Not code. Structure. Impossible geometry resolving into meaning his mind wasn't built to hold. He felt it press against his thoughts, not invasive, not violent. Curious. Evaluating. And then, it stopped. The lights returned. Systems rebooted. Voices surged back into existence. Everything was exactly where it had been. Except the stars outside the observatory were wrong. Not missing. Rearranged. Subtly. Precisely. As if something had tested the shape of the universe. And adjusted it. Teren's hands trembled despite himself. What did it do? He asked, voice barely steady. Elara didn't answer immediately. Because she was looking at him differently now. Not as an observer. As part of the equation. It asked a question, she said finally. Teren swallowed. What question? The beat. Whether we notice when things change. And for the first time since the anomaly began, Teren understood the real danger. Not that it was watching them, but that it was learning from them. No. It knew they could see it and O1 gave the order to stop looking. That was the first mistake. Or the only one left to make. The sanctuary flooded with motion as systems clawed their way back online, as voices overlapped into controlled urgency, as protocols tried to reassert meaning over something that had already stepped outside of it. Defensive grids came up in layers. Signal dampeners activated. Observation arrays throttled down under emergency directives. But it didn't matter. Because the change had already happened. They had seen it. And it had seen them seeing it. Teren didn't move with the others. He stood at the observation glass, staring into a sky that was almost correct. Almost. The stars were there. The constellations aligned within acceptable margins. The systems registered continuity. But the memory didn't match. That was the fracture. Reality said nothing had changed. His mind said everything had. And for the first time in his life, he trusted the discrepancy. Behind him, command voices cut through the chamber. Reduce external focus. Blind the deep field arrays. Isolate the anomaly pattern. No recursive modeling. Contain the human data streams. Stop. The single word didn't carry volume. It carried authority. Elara Thorne hadn't raised her voice, but the room adjusted around it anyway. Not because she outranked them. Because she understood the moment better than they did. Blinding yourselves now won't reverse contact, she said calmly. It will only leave you unable to track what happens next. We are preventing further escalation, a senior delegate snapped back. Your presence has already compromised. Our presence didn't create this. Mercer cut in, tone still even, but sharpened. It revealed it. That distinction is irrelevant if the outcome is the same. It's the only distinction that matters, Elara replied. Teren turned. Not because of the argument. Because of the silence that followed it. A different kind of silence. Not absence. Expectation. The distortion outside shifted again. Not violently. Not abruptly. Like something settling into place. Teren felt it, not physically, not through systems, but as alignment. The same pressure behind the eyes from before, but clearer now, structured, almost deliberate. It wasn't just present anymore. It was engaged. They're trying to suppress observation, Teren said quietly, the realization forming as he spoke it. They think if they stop seeing it, it stops interacting. That would be true, Ilara said. The chamber stilled. Then she finished. If it didn't already know we exist. That landed. Because suppression wasn't prevention anymore. It was surrender. What does it want? Someone demanded. Ilara looked back to the glass. It doesn't want, she said. Not the way we understand it. Then what is it doing? The pause. Evaluating. The words spread through the room like a slow shock. Not attacking. Not invading. Not even observing in the passive sense. Testing. Learning. Adjusting. Teren's gaze flicked to his wrist display. Still active. Still wrong. That pattern from before, it hadn't disappeared. It had embedded itself into the system's background structure, like a watermark in logic. He hadn't noticed it at first. Now he couldn't not see it. It's still here, he said. Mercer stepped closer. Where? In the interface. Not as data. As structure. Ilara's attention snapped to him. Show me. He didn't need to pull anything up. He simply shifted the display orientation, and for a brief second, the pattern resolved again. Angles that shouldn't exist, relationships that broke dimensional logic. And then, it changed. Not randomly. In response. The pattern simplified. Collapsed into something closer to recognizable form. Not readable. Not yet. But closer. It's adapting, Mercer said under his breath. No, Teren replied, the answer coming from somewhere deeper than analysis. It's translating. That changed everything. The chamber erupted again. Questions, orders, fear threading through control. But Teren barely heard it. Because the realization had already locked in place. It's not removing us, he said slowly. It's not erasing systems at random. Ilara didn't interrupt. She already knew where this was going. It's selecting, he continued. Testing for response. For awareness. For relevance, Mercer added quietly. Teren looked back at the sky. At the wrong stars. At the absence that was no longer hiding. If a system doesn't notice, he said, it gets removed. No one answered. Because they didn't need to. They had already seen the proof. So what happens, Teren pressed, voice tightening, when it finds something that does notice? Silence. Then Ilara spoke. It asks if we matter. The weight of that settled across every mind in the chamber. Not conquest. Not survival. Significance. Teren's breath slowed. Because suddenly the pattern, the question, the entire sequence made sense. The star that vanished. The rearrangement. This. Not destruction. Calibration. It wasn't erasing reality. It was refining it. No.
Up to this moment, everything has quietly fallen into place. Teren Vale has seen the impossible. Humans reacting to invisible anomalies. Ambassador Lara Thorne remaining calm. And John Mercer hinting that this wasn't a surprise at all. The coalition believes nothing has happened. But humanity has been tracking something for 6 years. Something massive, something hidden in plain sight. And now as Teren finally sees the detection in space itself, the truth begins to emerge. The anomaly isn't arriving. It never was. It's already here and humanity knew it.
It was waiting for an answer, Mercer said. Teren turned to him sharply. We don't even understand the question. No, Mercer agreed. But it understands us. That was the problem. And the opportunity. Because humanity had been preparing for this moment long before anyone else realized it existed. Not for this entity specifically. For the unknown that didn't follow rules. For the thing that couldn't be fought conventionally. For the moment where reaction mattered more than comprehension. Teren felt it click into place. Not a plan. A decision. They weren't reacting to the anomaly, he said, looking at Alara now. They were waiting for this stage. She didn't deny it. We've seen this pattern before, she said. Not at this scale. But enough to recognize the progression. And you know what it expects? We know what we choose to show it. That was the difference. Not knowledge. Teren turned back to the glass. The distortion wasn't shifting anymore. It was steady, focused, on them. Waiting. He lifted his wrist display. The pattern responded immediately, expanding, resolving, aligning towards something that almost resembled structure. Language was forming. Not imposed. Invited. What are you doing? A delegate demanded. Teren didn't look back. Answering. You don't know what you're saying. No, he agreed. But it knows what we mean. He hesitated. Just once. Because everything hinged on this moment. Then he did the one thing every protocol, every doctrine, every survival instinct would have rejected. He didn't hide. He didn't suppress. He didn't disengage. He leaned in. Focused. Observed. Deliberately. The pattern stabilized. For a fraction of a second. Perfect clarity. Not words. Not symbols. Understanding. A direct exchange. And then, it stopped. Not vanished. Not retreated. Resolved. The distortion beyond the glass softened. Not disappearing. Receding. Like something stepping back after completing a test. The stars, corrected. Not entirely. Just enough. Systems normalized. Energy readings stabilized. The pressure behind Teren's eyes faded. Slowly. Carefully. The chamber remained silent long after the event ended. No one rushed to speak. Because no one was sure it had ended at all. Teren lowered his wrist. His hands were steady now. Alara stepped beside him. What did it do? Someone asked from behind them, voice quieter than before. Teren didn't turn. He kept his gaze on the sky. Because for the first time, it felt empty again. Or close enough. It decided, he said. Decided what? A long pause. That we notice. The words settled into the silence. Not relief. Not victory. Something else. Something heavier. Because the implication remained. The entity hadn't been stopped. It hadn't been defeated. It had evaluated. And moved on. For now. Teren exhaled slowly. Around him, the coalition began the slow, careful process of rebuilding certainty from something that had shattered it. But he knew that certainty was gone. Not because they had seen something impossible, but because something impossible had seen them, and chosen not to erase them. Not out of mercy, out of recognition. And somewhere in the vast dark beyond Orith Prime, something now knew that humanity didn't hide from the unknown. It answered it.
In the end, there was no battle, no victory, no defeat, only a decision. Teren Vale chose not to hide, not to look away, and in doing so, humanity proved something no weapon ever could. That awareness is courage and the willingness to face the unknown matter. The entity didn't spare them out of mercy. It recognized them because when everything else stayed silent, humanity did one thing no one else dared to do.